hi, didn't see you there. Okay, so I should probably explain what this is. This series will be talking about Susie from Deltarune. And yes, I said series. This episode will cover chapters 1, 2, and the Spamton sweepstakes. We're going to be as in-depth as possible, and there's going to be no breaks along the way. Well, maybe some breaks. So, without further ado, let's just get into it. Chapter 1 reminds me a lot of the ruins from Undertale. You get told a lot of things that don't quite make sense yet, then a goat thing tells you to be nice, and you go through the game either being really nice or really mean, and the only real difference is the dialogue. You might be inclined to think that Chapter 1 is a bad introduction to this world, given the heights that Deltarune will soar to. You're wrong. I like this humble beginning. I like how closely this sticks to the world of Undertale. I like all of that shit. See, a lot of Chapter 1 is building up the formula that will eventually be subverted in later chapters. And, well, a big part of that formula is Susie. See, in chapters 1 and 2, we meet a character who acts like a dickhead in the beginning, and then, through the events of the story, they calm down and become an ally. And to go more in depth into Susie specifically, well, we're going to need to do something that's kind of regrettable. We're going to need to go frame by frame, baby. We're going to analyze every single microsecond of this story. Now, why this is necessary is pretty simple, actually. Susie talks to a lot of people, and thus has a lot to say about all of them. In fact, a lot of the time, her arc is kind of intrinsic to another character's arc, or vice versa. Hell, sometimes her connection to a character isn't even related to an arc, but it's still important to understanding who Susie is and what the story is trying to say. Now is as good a time as any to mention that we're also going to be collecting evidence for a conclusion I made later on. And without further ado, let's finally begin with Chapter 1, fully. See, after we are introduced to this world that looks eerily similar to the true pacifist ending of Undertale, I might add, we hug Toriel goodbye and head to class, and much like Undertale, we're introduced to a new fun cast of characters, like Berdly, Noel, and Jockington. Then, as class starts and Kris is desperately looking for a partner for their project, the door opens and the room is filled with a menacing aura. Immediately, you get vibes of other delinquent characters from fiction. Then, Kris is asked to get more chalk with Susie as Alphys desperately tries to get her out of the classroom. There, it is revealed that Susie in fact took the chalk and is now eating it. And then, she immediately starts bullying Kris. However, what she says here is very telling. She assumes Kris will get her expelled because of this information, something that by Kris's reaction seems out of character for them. Don't worry, we'll talk more about that later. This reveals that Susie is incredibly insecure. She assumes that when someone has the ability to hurt her, they probably will. And that's probably why she's so mean to the rest of the class, aside from the fact that they constantly assume the worst in her. However, that's everyone else. Why is Susie mean to Kris? These are our two main characters who will grow to be best friends in record time after all. Why does Susie hate them so much at the beginning of the game? Now, lots of people have thrown around motives for why Susie is mean to Kris here, whether it be because of some hatred towards humans or just because Kris is a weirdo who went to school in the same clothes they slept in last night. However, I personally think it's because she's jealous. As we learn later on, Susie really looks up to Toriel, and it's all but said that Susie has a bad relationship with her parents. From her perspective, she just arrived in a town where everyone hates her for being her. Then she sees this weird little emo kid be loved and respected by all of hometown. And to make matters worse, this is the kid of that one person who was nice to you. Now, we have a pretty good reason as to why Kris rejects everything, including their mother. However, Susie doesn't know that. From her perspective, Kris has everything and is treating it like nothing. Susie even mentions in Chapter 4 that if she knew about Kris's skill on the piano, she would have hated them for it. Why? Because in her mind, it's another confirmation that Kris has something that she doesn't. Whether it be a loving mother, a loving household, or, piano lessons. Then, the smoking gun. Susie lets Kris go because they have a good mother. As we learn later on, Susie takes genuine acts of kindness really seriously. even if they are, to be blunt, really stupid. Now, the thing I like about this introduction to Susie's character is that it's clear that she's just an angsty teenager. Yeah, don't get me wrong, Susie is a badass, and we will go into that, but overall, she's still a kid. And before we move on from this scene, there is something kind of important that we need to talk about.
Don't bother answering. If you haven't gotten it by now, your choices don't matter.
This fucking line, is arguably Susie's most iconic line and the thing most people take away from Chapter 1. However, I think that is kinda flawed, for lack of a more insulting term. In fact, it kinda pisses me off. Just know we're going to talk about this later. Now, obviously, we enter the supply closet, enter our first Dark World, and we get to see more of Susie's character. Notably, she is creeped the fuck out, and immediately relies on Kris, someone she hates by the way, to find a way out. Susie is acting this way because she's scared. No shit. She's not comfortable in this reality. This is a foreign situation to her and the player. Now, it's interesting that just a chapter later, Susie seems to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, desperately wanting Dark Worlds to be real. However, her being scared here is understandable. This reaction is incredibly human and, well, humanizes her. Something notable here is that Susie asks Kris to take the lead, only to, run the fuck away. This tendency to run off and do whatever she wants is a big part of Susie's character, and will be part of the reason why this video series will be so long and in-depth. The duo are attacked by Lancer and then proceed to Castletown. This is where Susie's attitude shifts from being scared to thinking that Dark Worlds are fucking lame. I think it's really funny that our introduction to the main form of gameplay is our other main character finding this incredibly boring. Here, you meet Ralsei, who immediately tells Kris and Susie that they are destined by fate to be heroes, to save the world and kill God or whatever. Now, something notable here is that if you skip it, Lancer will go on to explain his own version. How? Because we know Darkners later on don't know the prophecy, yet it seems that Lancer at least heard a summarized version. Just remember, there is a non-zero chance that Lancer has also seen the ending and does not give a single shit. We'll be talking more about prophecy stuff later, obviously. There's no way to avoid that. Just, I don't know what to do with this information. Then Lancer engages you in combat. After you beat him, something interesting happens. Susie demands that Ralsei takes off his hood so she can hear him better. This will start a theme with these two. Basically, Susie forcing Ralsei out of his shell. Anyway, after that, Susie immediately fucks off, leaving Kris with the semi-disgruntled Ralsei. So, when I was first playing these chapters, I came up with the mini-theory that each chapter focused on a different main character. Chapter 1, Ralsei, Chapter 2, Noel, Chapter 3, Kris, and Chapter 4, Susie. However, that could pretty easily be debunked by the fact that Susie is a pretty major focus in all of these chapters. Case in point, despite meeting two dark princes and learning that we are going to kill God, our biggest concern is stopping Susie from going full gremlin mode. Eventually we catch up with Susie, who is frustratingly pounding the door. Here we make the concerning discovery that Susie walked right through some spikes to get here. This is one of the few moments where Susie, there's no way to sanitize this, jokes about hurting herself. Whether this is to be interpreted as edgy humor or, is never elaborated on, and it's something I don't think we're ever going to get a straightforward answer on. This isn't the only moment Susie acts like this in the chapter. Later on, towards the gate puzzle, she asks why they don't just climb the spiked gates. Ralsei explains that they die, and Susie jokes that,
"Cool, I'll work on that and you do the puzzle."
And after Kris finishes the puzzle, she responds with,
"Damn, didn't get to impale myself."
Moving on. Fun fact, the entire time you do this puzzle, Susie encourages you not to listen to Ralsei. And elaborating on that, right now her relationship with Ralsei is stagnated, to say the least. And I think the reason why is because at this point in the story, they represent completely opposite worldviews. Ralsei encourages the player to choose mercy, while Susie fights everything you see. Ralsei likes puzzles, Susie hates them. Ralsei is a nerd, Susie is a bully who pushes people into lockers. Then there's Lancer, a very, very silly boy. Unlike Susie, who is a good person but has a violent bully persona, Lancer is just a good kid who's forced into being a bad guy. Like this cool scene where Susie threatens him and instead of being afraid, he just finds it cool. Lancer even tries to impress Susie later with the whole bucket scene, and Susie seems genuinely taken aback by the effort. This all culminates with this thing, affectionately referred to as fuck-ass K-Round, a dark nurse Susie previously attacked that has come back to fight you. Attacking them only lets them practice self-care and get stronger. Ralsei pleads with Susie to stop attacking, but she continues. Why? Well, because she doesn't want to look scared or afraid. This tells me that along with insecurity and jealousy, maybe Susie is afraid. Afraid of this new town where people hate her. Afraid of her parents. Even afraid of Kris. Again, we'll get back to that later, but this would explain why she continues her bully persona in the dark world. We fear what we don't understand after all, and what you fear has power over you, and that would probably piss Susie off. Eventually, after doing all the work yourself, this scene happens. Susie takes credit for K-Round's defeat, and this causes Ralsei to justifiably explain that she didn't do jack shit. In fact, she hasn't been doing jack shit since they got here. She's been making things worse. He then tells Susie that she's a hero, and whether she likes it or not, she better start acting like one. This causes Susie to pettily join the bad guys. That's right, Susie's a heel now. She betrays the main characters and becomes a bad guy with Lancer. This scene perfectly shows who Susie is right now. She's a bully clinging on to her violent ways, not out of ill will or malice, but out of fear. And when she gets rejected from the idea of being good, she just embraces being bad. It's also made incredibly clear that she's just doing this to be petty, and that's really funny. These scenes actually, in my opinion, are meant to warm you up to Susie after, an entire chapter of her being rude and mean to you. And I think that's the case because she's teamed up with Lancer, someone who already probably has endeared himself to the audience at this point, given the fact that he's completely harmless. This team up also kinda leads to the rest of the plot of chapter 1, so let's analyze it, I guess. I love Susie and Lancer for the same reasons I love Gary Oak. These two are cartoonishly evil, yes, but they're also incredibly harmless, most of their evil plans either being given up on or just not working in the first place. Like, sure, they are bad guys, but they're a lot closer to just chaotic siblings who eat salsa out of tree stumps. This dynamic ironically makes Susie more likable despite the fact that she's a bad guy now. This is the first time that when characters say Susie isn't all bad, you believe it. Before, we were judging her actions because she was mean to Kris, and the worldview Undertale set up. Fighting is bad, mercy good, therefore Susie bad. However, much like Susie explains at the end of the chapter, it's complicated. Being violent is bad, but Susie doesn't kill any of these Darkners. She just bullies them, and she has a point. She's been fighting Darkners that were sent to kill her. Sure, they are unwilling participants most of the time, and they'd rather be nice, but remember, Susie at this point is incredibly insecure, and it's only when someone justifies that worldview, but also shows her that Darkners aren't that bad, that she becomes nicer. But I think my favorite part of this duo is how much Susie cares for Lancer, getting worried when he's lost and confused, even though she denies that she's worried about him. We know better. She even demands that you stop attacking Lancer in their boss fight if he gets too hurt. This kinda sets up a theme for Susie. Susie loves her friends. This is one of the most important parts of Susie's character. She will do anything for her friends, and as we go forward, I want you to keep that in mind. After being forced to build and not fight a thrash machine, Susie comes up with a deal. She knows she can't go home without Kris and Ralsei, but being as petty as she is right now, she will only rejoin the group after fighting them and hopefully beating them. She does not, by the way. I already talked about this a little bit, but I love this boss fight because of how evident it is that Susie cares for Lancer. I already talked about what happens if you fight Lancer, but if you go the mercy route and convince Lancer to stop fighting, Susie will quit too, because there's no point in fighting if he doesn't want to. This ends the fight and is already a ton of character growth from a few minutes ago, from where she wouldn't stop attacking no matter what. Maybe hanging out with Lancer is what she really needed. Not a victory, not people to do her homework for her, but a genuine friend. One who's willing to accept the qualities that make her different. After the game gets back together, even though Susie insists that she'll continue to fight, but then she does something precious and invites Lancer to be part of the Delta Warriors. This little arc is so tiny, and yet in my opinion it makes this segment so memorable. On the surface, Undertale and Deltarune seem to be friendship simulators masquerading as RPGs. And yeah, they kinda are. Even if the newer chapters go to some darker depths, friendship is still a persistent theme, and it can only end well, right? Anyway, the game continues on. Susie feels hungry and with Lancer's help grabs a dark candy. But after learning that he's never even tried the stuff because his dad won't let him, she gives it to him. Then he explains that he feels happier with his friends. Then, out of nowhere, Ralsei explains that a Darkner's purpose is to serve all Lightners. This visibly disturbs both Lancer and Susie, and put a pin in this scene. This is unironically one of the most important bits of characterization for Ralsei and Susie's relationship. I am not kidding. And this is the first time Susie mentions being happier in the Dark Worlds than in the Light Worlds. Okay, put another pin in this, but a smaller one. Okay, no more pins. Lancer explains that he doesn't know how his dad will treat his new friends. Susie, probably just trying to sound tough, says bluntly that they'll just kick his ass. This leads Lancer to run away to the Card Kingdom, where a trio are kidnapped and thrown into jail. Then, when we see Susie again, she is dunked a Rudin into the trash. After finding a new appreciation for puzzles, not really, Susie continues onward and hears Lancer. But when she finally finds him, well, the best scene in Chapter 1 happens. Before we get into what I consider the best scene in Chapter 1, let's briefly consider what led our characters here. Remember, Susie is a delinquent with little to no friends. And Lancer, as the king's son, is surrounded by people but also has no friends. This leads to them becoming the best duo of all time, obviously. But it also means something more. What happens when that trust is betrayed? And, well, is that reaction that justified? Remember, even though Darkners are weird with how old they are, with characters such as Queen and Tenna obviously being upwards of 10 years old in the Light World, but adults in the Dark World, and characters such as Ralsei being teenagers, despite the fact that he probably isn't older than a week. Lancer has always been portrayed as a kid. We don't know how old he is, but it really shouldn't matter. Susie is a teenager. Her going out of her way to beat up a kid is wrong. However, that's kind of why I enjoy this scene so much. I don't think Susie was ever going to actually kill Lancer despite her insistence that she would. This is more just her acting the way she always has. Brash, violent, and hot-headed. I think the line she says before the fight begins accurately conveys what she really means by all this.
Why would anyone really want to be my friend anyway?
The amount of hurt there, the amount of, genuine sorrow is why this is so compelling. And yes, this fight can't exactly be won. It is a glorified cutscene. Because of that, it's kind of beautiful to me.
you know?
The thing I love about the end of the Lancer fight, though, is how quickly Lancer forgives Susie, but it's not for the reason you might think. I like how unsettling this is, as if Lancer is, like, used to this kind of treatment. Something else. See, Lancer reminds me a lot of Papyrus in a lot of ways. They're both incredibly silly comic relief characters. Both were originally supposed to have the song Bone Trousel. Both seem to know a lot more about the world than they're letting on. The thing I would say that they're most similar in is how forgiving they are and how unsettling it is. If you stop a no mercy run at Papyrus, he immediately forgives you of everything, despite the fact that he likely knows what you've been doing. And that reaction reminds me a lot of what Lancer is doing right here. Forgiving Susie just because. It's kind of raw in a weird way. Now, aside from that, one of my friends pointed out the obvious design detail that Susie has Bowser-like bracelets on her arms. I think this was intentional, considering, she's a dragon in a video game about video games where you play video games inside the video game. But Lancer, at least to me, reminds me a lot of Bowser Jr. That he's a silly little guy who leads his dad's armies, has a silly rivalry with the main characters. However, the difference is that Bowser, for all of his faults, is a good father in his own way. King, however, is more complicated. However, I do think the imagery used was to show us that these two would be natural allies in this world. They'd have a strong family-like bond. Susie promises not to hurt the king, that they'll talk it out and become friends. This makes Lancer overjoyed, and he frees the other heroes. This leads to a long elevator conversation, an old favorite of Toby Fox games, where Susie says that she'll finally listen to Kris, that she'll act if needed. This leads to a lot of funny dialogue, but I think the best part about this is that 90% through Chapter 1, you can finally play as one of the main characters in the game. I joke, but this is how I felt when I first played it, and it kind of bothered me. Now with more of the game out, I understand the intention a little more, and on replay, it's not as bad as I remembered, but it still bugs me, and I can only imagine how people back in 2018 felt. God, 2018 was almost 10 years ago. That doesn't feel right. Now, before we get to the end of Chapter 1 and go to the king fight, I briefly want to talk about Jevil. Jevil is interesting, to say the least. To allude to some further madness I wrote down the line, Jevil, much like King, seems to parallel Susie in a lot of ways. The scythe attack he uses at the start of the fight even used the same sound effect as Rude Buster. And the Devil's Knife is a Susie weapon. When Jevil confronts the group and challenges them to a simple numbers game, it's Susie who reciprocates the challenge. Not Ralsei, not Kris, Susie. She speaks for the group here. And in my opinion, she's not fighting because she's scared like before. After all, she does listen to your commands, and she isn't attacking mindlessly. I think she's doing this because this is her announcing that these are her friends and they're going to kick Jevil's ass. Again, there are a lot more Jevil-Susie parallels as we go on. But anyway, on to the king fight. Lancer asks his dad if they could just befriend the Lightners. However, King responds by grabbing Lancer by the neck, something that parallels Susie's introduction when she lifted Kris up by the collar. This scene leads to Susie having her first of many valid crash outs, telling him to simply let Lancer go. King tells her that he'll let Lancer go if they all kneel before him, and despite Lancer's pleas, they all do it. And right before they're all about to die, Lancer strikes back. Then the king fight begins. Now, King is a very interesting character in that he's a Darkner who feels lost and abandoned by the Lightners, so he retaliates with violence, wanting to spread the entire world in darkness. Who does this remind you of? Well, Asgore for one, but probably Susie, considering her entire attitude thus far. Yes, being a bully isn't the same as taking over the world, but what matters here is the parallels here. King embodies the same ideology Susie had been using up to this point, being the bad guy. And I think it's very important that the way she confronts these themes is through... I'm just gonna rip the band-aid off. It's not a phase dad-isms. Time to briefly talk about Susie and parental trauma. So, have you ever heard of Universal Mother Theory? Universal Mother Theory by Kuki914 is the theory that Queen from Chapter 2 represents basically the parental trauma of all of the Lightners and Ralsei. And here's the thing. In my opinion, this theory isn't only correct, it got confirmed with the introduction of Carol. Pretty much everything within the theory, in my opinion, is true. However, I'd like to expand it. I like to dub this Universal Parents Theory. By the way, this hypothesis only applies to Susie because of how she reacts to the adults around her. So, no, this does not mean that we could call Toriel a bad mom based on the treatment that Carol gives Noel. Basically, I believe that because Susie has very obvious parental trauma, she projects that onto all of the adults within the game. This is barely even a theory, this is just something she does. She treats every single adult very poorly at first, even characters she grows to stand up for, like Gerson and Tenna. Well, all adults except for one, Toriel. And that's because Susie really wants Toriel to be her mom. And it explains her reaction to King here. Now, obviously, you might say, King just attacked Lancer, one of Susie's best friends. Of course she'd be angry at that. And yes, you're right, she would be angry at that. However, her hatred of King goes on long past his redemption arc. She is the #1 advocate for keeping him in prison. She does not like him at all. She doesn't think he can be redeemed. And why is that? Well, I'm not going to say that Susie has a deadbeat dad or anything. I'm just going to say that I think she's projecting her own insecurities with her relationship with her own father onto King, especially after seeing what King did to Lancer. After defeating King, King begs for mercy. This prompts Ralsei to heal him like a dumbass. King then strikes back. King then singles out Susie, and right as he's about to finish her off, Kris, without our control, rescues Susie. This is the beginning of the mess that is Kris. Good thing we're not talking about that yet, because Kris immediately gets no-diffed. And right as King repeats the very mantra that Susie began the chapter with, Susie strikes back.
Hey, get away from my friend.
This moment isn't only cathartic because it's Susie standing up for Kris, a stark contrast to the beginning of the chapter, but it's a sign that she's truly changed. We can see her eyes now. It seems like Susie really is friendly, not just to Kris, but to us as well, the player, or the viewer, or however you experience Deltarune. I'm not here to judge. Then, obviously, Lancer comes in with the cavalry and sends his dad to his room. We see the fountain, and then bam, we're in the abandoned classroom. Susie questions if it was all a dream, something that will come up constantly. Then for a moment, Susie seems to revert back to her old bully persona, before saying that they should go back tomorrow. This sets up Susie's next arc, escapism, one that kinda gets resolved in Chapter 3 and probably won't be fully resolved until Chapter 7. Susie has already shown us her complexities. She starts out as a cartoonish bully, having everyone fear her as if she's the butt kicker from SpongeBob. However, in this introduction we learn a lot about her. In my opinion, I think she's jealous of Kris and insecure about herself, and she relies on violence when she's afraid. She's not above pushing other people to do her dirty work, but over time this facade of the big mean bully shatters around her. She makes friends. Lancer, this weird little kid who genuinely looks up to her. She reconciles with Kris, the victim of her bullying, after seeing that they, like her, just want to go home. She even does puzzles and learns to flirt. Badly. She's become the hero, and I truly believe that Susie's arc in this game is learning to become a hero. Now, something that I might as well mention now, because I won't mention it ever again, is that all of the main characters in this game names are anagrams. Kris being an anagram of risk, Susie being an anagram of issue, and Ralsei being an anagram of Azrael. Now, why is this? Well, here's the thing. Knowing how Toby Fox has used anagrams in the past, I believe that these anagrams are not proof that these are what they are. I don't think Ralsei is actually Azrael after all. I think it's proof of what they're not. See, in Undertale, Azrael Dreamer is an anagram of serial murderer, and yes, Azrael does go on to kill people 1,000,000 times after all, but he is not in and of himself a serial murderer. Beneath all of it, he's just an innocent kid. And just like how Deltarune is an anagram of Undertale, where yes, this is an RPG where no one has to die, it's also very different from that game. In fact, some would argue that they're almost nothing alike. I'd argue that these anagrams are to show that these are what these characters aren't. They have aspects that are similar, sure, but I don't think that Susie is defined by her issues. I don't think that Kris is truly just a risk to people's safety. In fact, these anagrams could be related to their arcs. As we go on, Susie confronts her issues and becomes a stronger person. We just saw her do it in Chapter 1. Ralsei learns to become more of himself, being defined less by what the prophecy wants of him and being more of himself. And Kris, I believe, over time, will become more disillusioned with the Knight's plans and start to side with their friends more. But that's going too far into speculation. For all we know, these anagrams could just be picked because they sound cool, and that would be very in line with Toby Fox's philosophy. Either way, let's move on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 starts off almost identically to Chapter 1. Except it's pretty clear that Susie is pretty buddy-buddy now. Even when she tries to bully Kris, it's revealed to quickly be a bait and switch. As they approach the fountain, Susie wonders aloud if they'll still be friends if there's nothing inside. We get our first real moment of Susie doubting Kris and her friendship. And then Noel shows up. It's pretty obvious that Noel has a massive, really embarrassing crush on Susie. And this is the first really big scene where that's explained explicitly. And this also starts the bit that Susie is denser than a brick. This reaction is a little more than understandable given that Susie didn't have any friends until yesterday. And the thought that someone would like her romantically is probably overwhelming. Anyway, after the duo decline Noel's offer, Noel pleads with Kris to bring Susie by the library later. Something important here is that we get a choice that matters. If you don't interact with Noel at all at the end of Chapter 1, nothing happens here. However, if you do, Noel hands Susie a lunchbox full of chalk. Okay, I promise this is relevant. It gives you a healing item. See, look, it's a choice that matters, guys. Shoujo anime references aside, this also leads to funny dialogue where Susie questions if Noel had chalk the whole time, why didn't she just say something? They could have avoided the entirety of yesterday. Anyway, Noel leaves, and then after letting her brain work for 2 seconds, Susie realizes that Noel was acting weird. However, she immediately misses the mark, and assumes that Noel is onto their secret identities. This starts like a mini-theme for this chapter where Susie just sort of assumes that Noel is out to get her, which is kind of really funny. Then, after jumping into the supply closet, we are met with Ralsei, and in still empty Castletown. Susie wonders where everyone is, and then Ralsei, not telling Susie, tells Kris to go get everything from the abandoned classroom. This is one of the first moments where Ralsei explicitly leaves Susie in the dark about the true nature of Darkners. And it's kind of heartbreaking. And after doing what we're told, Castletown is full of people. This starts something we're going to be doing a lot of, analyzing Castletown segments. After Lancer says some more oddly disturbing things about how he can never go home again, but it's fine because he'll just crash Ralsei's home. Is it fine? Anyway, we progress to the room scene. Susie seems a bit taken back by having her own room. Or is she? In Chapter 3, we see this suspiciously Susie-shaped room that looks run down. I think her reaction was more out of surprise that Ralsei would do something nice for her. Well, there's a darker interpretation. Maybe Susie sees this room full of stuff and is made uncomfortable by it. I mean, after all, she does make one of her signature edgy jokes when noticing the spikes. Maybe this reaction is less, whoa, I don't know what to say, and more, wait, why'd you design it like this? Just food for thought. Either way, the result is the same, with Susie chuckling to herself and then punching Ralsei in the arm and calling him a weenie. Susie doesn't like people worrying about her. When checking the fridge, she notices all the discarded scraps first, like pine cones, chalk, and moss, before noticing the actual food. Have you ever been going through something, but you don't know how to talk about it, so you just say a joke instead? Well, at the very least, you know another Toby Fox character like that, Sans. It is often theorized that Sans' jokes are a way to cope with his condition. He frequently describes himself as lazy, though, in my opinion, this is kind of inaccurate. Sans holds multiple jobs, more than you will ever hold. And at the same time, despite the fact that his entire worldview is based around giving up, he still has deep connections to his friends and family that he loves and cares about. The date scene is so iconic because it's when the mask finally slips, when he stops muddling through everything through pranks and just gives us a consistent line of characterization. Alphys does something similar by joking that she's a loser, but these aren't really jokes, are they? And I kind of feel the same way about these scenes in Susie's room. Yeah, sure, they're jokes, but they're also kind of concerning. Like joking about impaling yourself in your sleep, or eating moss and pine cones. Yeah, it's funny, but should it be? Yeah, regardless of future chapters, Susie seems to really like it here. As Ralsei says, this is a second home to her. See, now I'm going to do the thing everyone else does when they make long Deltarune videos, and talk about the themes of escapism in this game. Escapism is a mental diversion from unpleasant aspects of daily life, typically through activities involving imagination or entertainment. Escapism may also be used to occupy oneself away from persistent feelings of depression or general sadness, according to the first paragraph on Wikipedia on the Wikipedia page of escapism. Omori released like a year before Chapter 2 and is almost exclusively about these themes. But unlike that game, Toby Fox takes it in a more metatextual direction. Susie is someone who probably doesn't have the best home life, has like 4 friends, 3 of which she used to bully, and the 4th one is only recently learning about her. All of these friends are a direct result of ditching her shitty life and enjoying the Dark Worlds. Lots of people have compared the first 3 Dark Worlds to respective forms of entertainment, like board games, the internet, TV, and video games. And I think it's notable that in the chapter where Susie stops having fun in the Dark Worlds, they become more dark and scary, like how Castletown appeared to her, first in Chapter 1. However, there is an irony. Susie is a fictional character who buries herself in fiction. And because of that, there are a ton of parallels made throughout the game that we will get into later. But overall, I'd say right now we're focusing on the positive aspects of escapism. I mean, Susie literally gets her own room. She gets new friends. She gets to talk to a girl she likes. She gains a new appreciation for the real world, and as we go on, we will find Susie acting more and more confident in the real world as well. Not just because of the Dark Worlds, but because of her friends, which are a direct result of the escapism she indulges in. For now, let's just acknowledge what's happening in the text. Susie is leaving her shitty home life for this dreamlike new reality. Well, until that reality tells her to do her homework anyway. But as we leave, Lancer and a few others decide to join us on our homework journey. As they leave the Dark World, Susie wonders where Lancer is, assuming that he ditched them. Of course, then they go to the library, find a Dark World, and Susie, instead of being upset or disturbed, just wants to jump in, have another adventure where she's the hero. As we enter the Dark World, Susie observes as Noel is taken away by Queen. This immediately pisses Susie off, naturally. This is notable because, unlike King, where Susie's reactions are more violent, I'd say, against Queen, her reactions are played more for comedy. And yes, that is because Queen is a more comedic character, but I think it's because in Chapter 1, Susie is looking to go home. She's looking to go back to normal reality. In Chapter 2, she wants to immerse herself in escapism. She wants to go further in it. She wants to go deeper down into it. So obviously, immediately finding an evildoer and pointing at them like you're a shonen protagonist is what Susie does in this situation. But we'll get more into my universal parent interpretation later. As for now, Susie's one goal is to save Noel. I love how much Toby Fox is playing into Susie being a traditional, if unlikely, hero here. Chapter 1 made Susie out to be this hero who wasn't supposed to be, almost as if it was a mistake. I mean, she literally turns on us and allies herself with the bad guys. And it isn't until the end of the chapter where she actually does something heroic. So here, when she immediately enters the Dark World and immediately dictates to save Noel, it's a refreshing change of pace. Even though she entered here for selfish reasons, she's still saving an innocent person here. Anyway, Susie does some generic hero entrance, but screws it up by telling Noel that she's going to get roboticized. And after that, Queen sends Noel away, and Susie is again worried for her safety. But none of that matters now because we get to play video games. This scene is funny for a couple reasons, but it's even funnier to dorks like me. And if you'll let me, I'm going to ruin the joke. See, in Chapter 1, Lancer has this unique form that turns him into a stool called Lancer Stool Form L. This allowed Susie to get the dark candy and then give it to him. Now, in this scene, when they're working together as a team to play video games, Ralsei does it. But the reason why it's funny is because when Lancer becomes a stool, Susie accuses Ralsei of being jealous. And the joke is, Ralsei was jealous because he stole his fucking technique. I wasted months of my life on this video. After besting Queen and Punch-Out, we move on to Sweet Cap and Cakes. So, if you're a longtime Deltarune fan, you're probably a little more than frustrated that I've spent roughly 40 minutes explaining jokes and minute-long character details rather than talking about the real shit, the meta implications. So, I feel that the beginning of Chapter 2 is a good time to bring up Susie's role in Deltarune. Like, not as a fictional narrative, I mean as a game that you can play. Susie is intentionally left in the dark about the implications of the world. Whether it's because she's in a new town, Kris wants to keep the night stuff a secret, or Ralsei is deliberately lying to her. However, as we already know, Susie has a habit of flipping the game off and doing whatever she wants anyway. And this is why your choices don't matter kinda matters. Because I feel like this line is supposed to be viewed in the same way as Flowey's iconic catchphrase,
In this world, it's kill or be killed.
in that it's something we're told at the beginning of the game that the rest of the game continues to prove is wrong. However, Flowey is a cheeky little fuck. He knows we're playing a video game and as such projects his worldview and beliefs onto us, partially because he assumes that we are Kara, and kinda. And in universe, Susie isn't saying to the player, "That's right, fucko, there's only one ending." Ralsei does that. This is her telling Kris that no matter what, she's going to push them around and they're going to do their group project. But it also has the meta meaning in that your choices don't matter in this game. But Susie isn't aware of that. It's kind of a consistent theme. There are several times where Susie will seemingly give us a choice as a player just to do what she wants anyway. Now, normally this would go into hype moments in aura, type storytelling like something like JJK. I mean, in effect, Susie is literally just doing this. This adds to her anti-authority and rebellious persona, and if this was a game that made fun of the fact that it's a game, like a Mario RPG, I'd leave it at that. But this isn't just something to make Susie look cool, so how is this special? So, remember Jevil? Oh yeah, Jevil is an insane weirdo who thinks he's truly free by hiding himself away from the world. However, this actually matters. Jevil seemingly has a connection to the ever-elusive Roaring Knight, which probably made him like this. Here's the thing. We have a guy who insists that as long as we continue down our set path, we aren't free, and that the most freeing thing to do in a world bound by prophecy is to stand in defiance to it, to stay in your room. And we have this character who robs us of choice and hates authority figures, who later is encouraged to break free from the shackles of fate to make her own future. Huh. So even though Susie likely doesn't understand what she's doing by this, she still is passively subverting fate. This is kind of a big deal. But back to Sweet Cap'n Cakes. This is so significant because in terms of gameplay, each character has their own role, and they all fit pretty closely to standard RPG tropes. Kris is the leader. They make decisions and do the plot relevant stuff. They have a sword and shield. Susie is the tank. She has an axe and says edgy things. And Ralsei is the white mage. He's a soft boy. However, here's the first time Susie makes a permanent change to gameplay. What, are you used to acting once only during a turn? Think again, fucko. Every character can now act. This change makes the gameplay less rigid and more freeing. And yeah, realistically, it is weird that every party member fits nicely into a certain role. And it is weird that Susie needs to be told to dance. And from Undertale, we know that monsters don't have determination, or at least a lot of it, or can act like Frisk. However, this isn't Undertale. This is a world where monsters can bleed. Or yeah, human souls are really powerful, but it's not the coughing baby versus hydrogen bomb dynamic they had in Undertale. So, like, Susie sees this as stupid, and it is. This is where hype moments in Aura become good writing. Susie isn't just cool for telling us to go fuck ourselves. She's cool because she changes what we first thought was possible from previous contexts. Did any of that make sense? I can't hear you. I'm just going to assume it did. Anyway, we have the most creative end to a boss encounter so far, and it's thanks to Susie. Anyway, skipping ahead, we get to the roller coaster scene. Now, a lot of you probably know what's coming next. However, here we get some Noel characterization. It's revealed that she became a willing peon of Queen because she couldn't say no. She then tries to awkwardly hit it off with Susie, and this leads to nowhere. So then we get introduced to the best part of the chapter. Berdly. Okay, so I know a lot of people don't like Berdly. I don't know why. So, Berdly analysis isn't the name of the game here, and I'm not going to go too in-depth here. However, for sparse analysis, I'm basically going to be plagiarizing Stuffed Alpaca's analysis. Go watch that video instead. So, I have a lot to say about Berdly, but for right now, 3 things are important. Berdly is a prick. He constantly assumes people are dumber than him, especially Susie, who he views as his complete opposite. He really wants to be Kris's rival. And 3, and this is important, he really doesn't like Susie. It's very clear that pretty much all 3 of Berdly's friends kind of fucking don't like him sometimes, or at the very least annoyed by him. Noel seems to really resent him sometimes, even if she does actually care about him. Susie right out rejects him as a person most of the time, only seeming to show the guy affection when he gets hurt. And based on Kris's reaction to the player, saying that they're going to go to the festival with them, they seem really surprised and shocked, like, really, you're going to make me date that guy? Though I'll elaborate more on this connection later. As it is clear by my tone, I think that Berdly is peak. I really enjoy his characterization, I love his character, and nothing anyone can really say about how annoying they find him will really persuade me otherwise. He's just a good character to me. I'll explain more later, but it seems that Berdly is being manipulated by Queen to do her bidding. I'll delve more into the Sim Supreme's relationship with Susie later, but what's important here is that Berdly hates Susie, and then he gets epically exploded and makes a Mario reference. The Lancer fan club get derailed, and we see Susie in pain trying to shrug it off like it's nothing, an old habit of hers. Now, the interesting thing is, in the files there's an unused sprite for Susie bleeding. I don't know why this went unused, considering we see Susie and Noel bleed later on, but my own personal take is that I think Toby held off on showing blood until those moments because this is a relatively minor injury, maybe like a broken ankle or something. And if Undertale has anything to go on, it seems that Toby Fox is under the belief that blood should be saved for meaningful scenes. I bring this up because, every single pixel in this game will inevitably start a scholarly debate in the comment section, and I think that's awesome. Anyway, after Ralsei heals her, Susie acts flustered about it. Susie pretends to not care about healing magic before asking him how he did it. Then, Ralsei offers to teach Susie how to do it, and this response is full of the exaggerated bravado Susie portrays. Something I haven't really mentioned up to this point is that this tough exterior, at least the exaggerated version of it we see, is likely just an act to look cool. Remember, Susie is an antisocial teenager, a bully who isn't even invited to play kickball. This cool exterior, much like a certain polite church girl, is accurate to who they are, yes, but it's a deliberate exaggeration in acts. Susie seems cool and scary, possibly hiding the fact that she's a massive dork who really needs friends. And Noel, because those expectations were likely forced on her. This is a flowery and verbose way of saying that Susie initially rejects Ralsei's offer because she's trying to look like a badass, and then she sheepishly accepts because she's actually a massive fucking nerd. And then we get a fake choice where Susie just decides to take Ralsei to leave the chapter for a little bit. Let's analyze this relationship between Ralsei and Susie, as I believe it's one of the more important friendships in the game. The thing about this relationship is that, at first, these two seem like polar opposites, people who would not or could not get along. But as Deltarune subverts classic RPG tropes and deconstructs them, naturally these two would make up one of the more important relationships in the game. So let's just rip the band-aid off. Ralsei is weird, right? It's an understatement. Most of the fandom assumed he was literally Asriel when Chapter 1 came out. Then Chapter 2 came out, and then he deliberately started acting weirder, to the point where most people assumed he was lying about everything. Which is kinda true, or was a master manipulator, which I think at this point is verifiably false. A theme for Ralsei's character as a whole is his whole personhood. Is he really a person? Is he allowed to feel things? He says blatantly several times that a Darkner's purpose is to be subservient to Lightners, that they don't deserve to have a personality or feelings, or at the very least, he doesn't. Lots of people take this at face value, that Ralsei doesn't like other Darkners. However, this isn't true. He deliberately lets them all stay with him. I believe whenever he says what a Darkner's purpose is, he's projecting. This is what he believes to be true for him, and something that other Darkners, be it Queen, Tenna, King, or otherwise, don't really conform to. Thus, he continues to say it. Kinda like another character with their own toxic beliefs. Ralsei believes that he was meant to be a follower, not a leader, that he wasn't meant to be a player one. This is disturbing to Susie. She sees Darkners as real people, and as we've already mentioned, she loves her friends. So, if your friend who you previously thought was a doormat, and let's be honest, he kinda is, turned out not to value himself, then yeah, you'd probably help him. And that's what Susie does in her own Susie way. And we see this over and over and over and over again. But as for right now, this is how it starts. I'll go more in depth with this stuff later because obviously. But for now, it's worth noting that this moment where Ralsei teaches Susie something simple is brought up again later at the Tunnel of Love scene. When we first met, I was so nervous about first impressions. I hid my face so you wouldn't be able to see. How do I even be a friend? All I have to do is be nice, is what I thought. But I'm starting to realize being friends is more than that, isn't it? Susie sometimes, she isn't nice at all. She's selfish, she's rude, she's sarcastic. But isn't it wonderful that she's her? Is what I started thinking today. This directly connects Susie's influence to Ralsei's character development. I mean, this is the scene where he starts having his identity crisis, which continues to be a massive theme throughout the rest of the game. But as for now, Susie asking one of her friends to teach her something isn't just character growth, it's a sign of her own independence that rubs off on Ralsei. Of course, this is where Susie learns her healing spell, which right now is the worst spell in the game, but over time will probably become your greatest tool in your arsenal. This again goes back to what I was saying about subverting classic RPG tropes. Susie is the tank, yet learns a healing spell that becomes even better than the white mages. And it makes me excited for what further subversions we can see later on. Will Ralsei get his own damage spell? Will Kris start to gain magic too? I mean, the only one who knows the definitive answer to all of this is Toby Fox himself. However, it is fun to speculate. So something I want to briefly talk about is the Noel segment. While the scene isn't about Susie, it's related to her in the same way that I think Kris and Susie are parallels. I also think that Noel and Susie are parallels. I'll talk about this more as I go on, but we're going to briefly be talking about this segment with Noel and Kris for a couple of reasons, but mainly because Noel is important to the game and important to Susie. However, I'm mostly going to be skimming over it and talking about the characters within it. When we find Noel, she's hiding from Queen, and it's revealed that Noel is afraid of her. Referring back to the Universal Mother theory, this bit with Noel is that Queen represents Noel's overbearing mother. And by that I mean the joke is that she wants to be Noel's mom. This again is played for comedy, and Queen is an inherently comedic character. However, everything in Deltarune is either building up to a joke or a joke recontextualized to be something serious. It's important to note that the original idea of Queen was going to be a lot darker and scarier, as we know from Undertale's 9th anniversary newsletter. Undertale's 10 years old now. That doesn't feel right. Anyway, on Queen, Toby says this, and I quote,
"It took me a very long time to figure out Queen's design. I wanted her to be intimidating and cool. Inspirations included Hexadecimal from Reboot, the Alien Queen from Alien, Power Ranger Bad Guys, and Rosemaster from Cucumber Quest. After I began writing her dialogue, she shifted into being a more humorous character. I decided to reflect this in her design."
So I'm going to go out on a limb here. Say that Queen was originally a more overt Carol parallel. They both use Coral Blue No. 2 semi-gloss lipstick. Both are overbearing mothers who are trying their best to do what's right for Noel. And we don't get a lot of characterization for Carol in Chapter 4, but it's implied that a lot of the reason why Noel acts the way she does is because of her mother. I mean, imagine that your older sister vanished from the face of the earth when you were like 10, and then your mom buries herself in her work and starts bringing home black katanas while expecting you to do everything that's asked of you. Noel has a hard time telling people no, even when it's something she really doesn't want to do. Okay, you're probably asking how this is relevant to Susie. Well, to Noel, someone who feels like she has no control in her life, Susie's fuck it we ball attitude is very appealing. Look, at the end of this chapter, Susie tells Noel to wake up and encourages her to fight Queen after a romantic scene between them. Then Noel tells Queen that she doesn't really want to be her willing peon. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because a very similar scene happens in chapter 4. The scene where Carol tells Susie to leave, and then Susie blurts out that she's taking Noel to the festival tomorrow. And yeah, this is juvenile and angsty, but look how Noel responds here. She doesn't view it that way. This means something to her. The ability to stand up for yourself is what Noel likes about Susie. Or maybe she just really wants to be shoved into lockers. I'll talk a lot more about this stuff later on. I mean, I already analyzed a minute-long joke over, so, like, I think my credibility is out the window at this point. But yeah, we'll get there when we get there. One final thing I want to talk about before the party meets back up is kind of the exact opposite. Berdly. On the surface, this seems irrelevant. Berdly sucks. He's annoying and everyone doesn't like him. But as we learned from the Spamton sweepstakes, Kris and Berdly actually have a history together, and that means that Kris would often prank him. This is reflected in their adversarial/rival dynamic. I mean, it's implied that Kris mocked Berdly for losing his party, and yet this isn't followed up with the same blatant disregard he has for Susie. He just accepts it. In Berdly's mind, Kris is his Sasuke, even if that isn't true at all. The important thing to note about Berdly is that he believes that all of this is what Noel would have wanted. He's doing all of this because he does actually love and respect Noel, viewing Kris as a kidnapper in this route, and in the weird route deliberately wondering what's wrong with Kris and Noel, and his dialogue sadly reflects this. I'm gonna have to read it again, so, That's it, Kris. I don't know what you're doing, but if you're hurting my friend Noel, then I have no choice but to stop you by force. This isn't only heartbreaking, it's consistent characterization. Berdly isn't protective of Noel because she is his or whatever. It's because he genuinely loves and values her as a friend, even if he is a dick about it. And that's all I wanted to talk about in this segment. So after that 10-minute detour, the gang is all back together. Susie, of course, has learned her healing spell, which sucks right now, but will eventually become more effective than heal prayer. A slight detail I really like about Ralsei is that he starts using sarcasm for the first time. I think that Ralsei learning sarcasm goes a long way in helping him become his own person. Anyways, Susie finds Noel by accident and the gang's back together. Something I didn't mention about the Noel segment is how much of a fucking simp she is. Okay, we're gonna put a pin in this topic and attempt to move on. Be patient. Something I want to talk about is this tiny scene where they need 20 mice to proceed, and Noel comes up with an idea to do it like a group project. This is tiny, but considering how Noel's whole arc is standing up for herself, and again seeing Susie validate her newfound confidence, it's tiny, but it's really heartwarming. Anyway, it's Berdly time. So Queen finds the light nerds, where she attempts to manipulate the group by threatening Berdly's life, implying that she had him in captivity. Until Berdly walks on screen and the Queen shifts to Plan B. This is the beginning of Berdly's character arc. It's revealed that he made the alliance with Queen not only to ease up on his ego, but make sure Noel was safe. Then, during their dramatic monologue, Queen captures the rest and sends them to their ruins. Skipping forward a bit, Kris uses Lancer to escape their cage. And here's where we see him start to turn to stone for the first time. Susie, of course, takes on the older sister role and tries to take him to Ralsei to fix him. Unfortunately for them, Berdly tags along too. If you go back to Susie's room, you can find a room that looks like shit and seems to be purposely limited on purpose, at least compared to the room Ralsei made Susie. But hyperanalysis is the name of the game here, so as stated several times, the universal mother theory is what I'm using to extrapolate possible lore here. Susie's relationship with Queen seems to be noticeably absent. She isn't annoyed by her like how she acts with Berdly, or forgetful of her like how she reacts with Ralsei, just sort of vilifying her constantly. As the searches imply, she has a surface level understanding of who Susie is. Again, Queen isn't really focused on Susie, but rather Noel, and Kris to some extent. But to me this implies a few things, and hear me out here. Maybe Susie's mom isn't in the picture anymore, and no, I don't mean she's dead anything. Maybe she just left her, or much like everyone else's parents in this game, got divorced, and Susie's dad got custody. This would explain why Susie has so much venom in her voice when talking to Carol and Queen, why she looks up to Toriel so much, and maybe she's quick to assume that another maternal figure is rejecting her in some way. And when one shows her kindness, she puts that person on a pedestal. However, this game constantly makes Susie interacts with moms in some way, to the point where mommy issues are kind of a big theme of the game. Deltarune, more like mother. So the second explanation is that Susie's mom is neglectful. Now that sounds kind of dark, but unfortunately there's a lot of evidence for this interpretation. For one, Susie constantly mentions being hungry in Chapter 1. Compare that to Toriel, who is always making food with Susie or providing it to her. And if Susie's mom was also verbally degrading, it could explain her "it's not a phase mom"-esque crash out in Chapter 4. And of course it would mirror Queen's degradation of Susie and why it would piss her off so much. Hell, you can even fit the thing with the rooms being representative of their personalities in here. Maybe Susie's mom doesn't quite understand her and stopped trying a long time ago. Maybe that's why this room is so bare bones. Anyway, after progressing through more puzzles, we get more proof that Berdly is in fact, say it with me, a dumbass. We get launched into his tragic backstory. When he was a kid, he was seemingly abandoned by everyone around him until he got a reputation for being smart, for winning a spelling bee after Noel couldn't say the word December. Something she did earlier in the chapter, by the way. This thing already went full circle and you weren't even noticing. Man, it's almost like these games are good or something. Berdly states that in his opinion, he's kind of a fraud, because Noel helps him study. Now that everyone has such high expectations for him, he can't let anyone down again due to his fear of being forgotten. Huh. Let's just, put that in our back pocket. Then Lancer points out that everyone's stupid, and Susie adds that they don't care if he's smart or not. It's not like their opinion of him could get much worse. However, this leads to the bit that you either find hilarious or ungodly annoying. This starts the simp arc that is currently ongoing and will probably end next chapter at the festival. So because Berdly was supported by someone, a gamer girl no less, he starts to simp over and over and over for her. So let's talk about it. I'm gonna say something controversial. I think I like Berdly so much because he's like Susie. Both are introduced as rival characters for Kris to overcome. Susie is their literal bully, and Berdly is some annoying dickwad to overcome. However, this is where they are the same. Both switch sides and become good guys for the sake of their friends. Berdly to save Noel, and Susie because of Lancer. Both value their friendships highly because they fear being alone and forgotten. Both use axes in combat and have 2 separate boss fights in their respective chapters. Berdly and Susie are both unlikely heroes. Susie is a delinquent, and Berdly is because he's a wimpy nerd and because he's been presented as the main threat for so long. And that's where these similarities end, unfortunately. Because I think Berdly is a perfect foil for Susie, better than Kris or Ralsei. Berdly because Berdly fucking sucks. He's annoying, he's a nerd, he constantly devalues his friends. He assumes that Susie is stupid and he treats Noel like an object most of the time. Yeah, it is mostly deserved, by the way. Berdly is a complete asshole in this chapter. However, no one should be made to feel forgotten. And given, once again, the universal mother theory, and how he describes himself as forgettable, this leads me to believe his home line ain't exactly the best either. But instead of rebelling like Susie or doing whatever the hell Kris is doing, he sucks up to authority, willingly becoming the top student and volunteering for the library, and using his status as a nerd to lord it over people. This is significant to a point I want to prove much later, so hold on to that for now. But thing is, Berdly is going out of his way to fight back against the authority he loves so much here, and against Kris and the Weird Root. It kinda makes him one of my favorite characters. And I only hope he gets more scenes where he chooses his friends over complacency as Deltarune continues. Berdly also has a shocking amount of relevance to the plot, and as we go on, there will be tons and tons of references to Berdly, and specifically what you can do to him. He's also foiled by this weird little salesman thing. Oh god, is that what we're going to talk about next? I really hope not. Spamton, Spamton, Spamton. What more can I say about Spamton that hasn't already been said? So, I'll just leave it at everything about Spamton kind of needs more discussion than we have time for today. And thankfully for me, Jevil is more relevant to Susie's character than Spamton is. Because as far as she's concerned, Spamton is just a creepy weirdo who attempted to kill her friend. However, as many of you know, this little shit is kind of relevant to everything Deltarune related. Even 2 chapters after his defeat, he's still being referenced. So, even though this isn't a theory video, yet, just know we'll go far, far, far deeper into this little shit. Anyway, what I want to focus on is the gang's defeat of Spamton. He says some vague shit about breaking the strings of fate and being truly free. So, this scene is kind of disturbing, right? Your friend talks to a slimy businessman, and after you follow them into a disgusting looking basement, this weird mechanized puppet starts to fight you and your friends, and you have no context for any of it. If Susie was speaking for the group against Jevil, here, she's an outsider looking in, and in my opinion, getting the impression that something is very wrong with Kris. And so, she asks,
Hey, so are we seriously not gonna talk about any of that? That was goddamn weird. Puppets, strings, hands. What the hell does any of that mean? And the way he just broke.
Ralsei attempts to reassure the group that this didn't mean anything, that Spamton is just a broken program acting out of order. But Susie notices that Kris has goosebumps and asks if they're okay. No matter what you answer here, Susie just seems to accept it and move on. This is something that continues with Susie. She won't say anything, but you'll know that she's concerned. And the majority of these scenes happen with Kris. I want to state again that while Susie is dense, she's not stupid. She's gonna find out about Kris's condition sooner or later, and that how that's handled is really a topic for later, but really, it gets hinted at first here. And now that we're out of the deep, deep pit that is Spamton discussion, for now, we can go back to talking about our favorite bluebird. Berdly goes through a secret passageway with Susie. This, ironically, despite Berdly's intentions of giving them more alone time, accidentally leads to Noel and Susie's Ferris wheel scene, making sure that he'll never get the girl. Anyway, Kris and Ralsei have their tunnel of love scene. I already talked about the way Ralsei talks about his identity crisis, and I want to reiterate here that it is Susie who is the sort of progenitor of all of this. And speaking of Susie, okay, we finally have got to the Ferris wheel scene. So I'd like to get in some general thoughts. So far as presented, Susie and Noel are seemingly polar opposites. Noel goes to church, Susie drinks alleyway milk. Noel is a top student and beloved by the town. Susie is an outsider who no one really cares about. Noel is easily coerced into things she doesn't want to do. Susie doesn't take shit from anyone. Noel eats home-cooked meals, Susie eats chalk. However, For some reason, Noel has a crush on Susie. I believe this is because Susie has control over her life. Well, as much control as you can have over your life as a teenager. The point is, Noel admires that part of Susie, and that's why this scene is so good to me. Because it's these two finally sitting down and talking. And this scene also happens to serve as a massive character arc for both of them. Now, originally I was just going to read out the entire thing word for word, but after hearing how bad my Noel voice is, I'm going to spare you that fate. So I'm just going to talk about this scene as it is presented. On the surface, as far as a linear series of events goes, Susie saves Noel, they have some small talk, they get on a Ferris wheel ride, and then Berdly ruins everything. But on a deeper analysis of what's actually going on here, I'd actually like to focus on what she has to say about the pencil. Something that I will reiterate is that Susie takes small acts of kindness really seriously. Even being handed a pencil from Noel causes Susie to spare her from being bullied like the rest of the class. When Susie talks about the pencil, she was likely taken aback by that kindness. This is likely why Susie is so awkward around Noel, because she doesn't know how to respond. Why would anyone be kind to her? And as we see later on with how Susie reacts around Toriel, it's also awkward, as if she doesn't know how to react. And as for Noel, cringe dialogue aside, what she sees in Susie is the ability to stand up for yourself, to take control of your life. Freedom, in a weird way. And something I like about this scene is that it's revealed that these two actually have a lot in common. A common theme with these two is that even though they seem like they're polar opposites, they actually have a ton in common. They find out that they're more the same. This not only causes Noel to stand up for herself later, but it allows Susie to be more emotionally vulnerable with the rest of the cast. These two are good for each other. Both of them are lost girls that found each other. And yeah, I'm going to bring up the soundtrack to prove my point. This track, the one you're hearing right now, is called Lost Girl, and for a long time this was assumed to be Noel or Des's theme. Don't worry about who Des is, it doesn't matter, because it seemingly only plays for their scenes. However, this music also plays during the "oh shit, the funny old man was a dead guy the entire time" scene. I like this song a lot because it's not only melancholy, but it's wistful and hopeful, and if I'm correct here, it belongs to both of them. This scene plays for both Noel and Susie. In fact, as of the recent chapters, it plays more for Susie than Noel. And considering it's a remix of Girl Next Door, this, to me, indicates that the whole finding out that they're more similar thing is intentional. Music is important to Deltarune and its plot, so both of them sharing a theme seems significant to me, almost as if it really matters to the story Toby Fox is trying to tell. And because of that, among other things, I really like this scene. It's an exploration for why both of these people really like each other. It shows them just being awkward teenagers, which is something I haven't focused on as much. Because, yeah, a lot of Noel and Susie dialogue can come off as cringe because it's awkward and uncomfortable. And it's written that way because that's just how teenagers talk to each other. So, for these reasons, on top of my own speculation on these two becoming more like the other, I really appreciate this scene. After the ride, Susie seemingly tries to ask Noel out before being interrupted by Berdly. This causes Berdly to reveal the joke that he wasn't actually obsessed with Noel at all, but just trying to reciprocate her false feelings for him. This is something that also gets overlooked about Berdly's character, but Berdly is weird. As pointed out by Stuffed Alpaca, he His comedic crush on Susie was probably generated by the fact that she helped him, just like Noel helped him. And because of Berdly's ego, he assumes that, well, you know. This, of course, leads to Noel grabbing him by the shirt and shaking him a bunch. Anyway, Susie rejoins our main cast of characters, and something I haven't noticed before is that the howling wind sound effect before each boss fight is similar to Undertale's on the Geno route. I don't know what this is supposed to be implying, if anything at all. Maybe this is just here for hype moments and aura. Or maybe we're getting closer and closer to the end of the world. Whatever, I don't have the dangest idea. Time to kill the queen. The killer queen, that is. For my money, that's the best pun I've ever written. The group informed Queen that her plan to use Noel to create dark fountains is going to fail, because Noel is with Berdly only for... yeah. Keep this in mind, this is important. I swear Berdly is the key to all of the lore in this entire franchise. We actually learn a lot about Queen's motivations, and I really like that even if Chapter 1 and 2 follow a pretty similar formula, we get two villains that are basically exact opposites. King is a manipulator who barely shows up, and when he does, he uses his son as a hostage and goes on an anime monologue about how Lightners deserve pain because they abandoned Darkners and use them for means of entertainment rather than treating them like people. Queen, on the other hand, assumes that because people take comfort in their screens watching funny videos, that that's just the way the world should be. People should be in a constant state of happiness. As stated before, I think King has a ton of parallels to Susie. I mean, both even have the same lines. Queen's ideology, on the other hand, is more like a twisted version of Ralsei's worldview, that a Darkner's purpose is to serve Lightners. Queen wants the Lightners to serve her, to constantly indulge in escapism. Sure, on the surface they don't sound that similar, but in reality, both are fulfilling a Darkner's purpose in a twisted way. Hell, she even makes rooms for the main characters just like Ralsei does. She wants to do it to the entire world and rule over them. I guess you could say Queen wants to be everyone's universal mother. After the Queen fight, depending on your method of going about it, the result will be different. If you use mercy, Berdly breaks free with no harm done to him. However, if you fight instead, Berdly ends up paralyzing his arm in the process. So keep this in mind, but it's another instance of our choices mattering, and it involves Berdly. And you know what else you can do to Berdly in this chapter? So, depending on your choices, the fate of a character changes. Put a pin in this. We'll come back to this however long it takes me to finish this video series. Anyway, Berdly is injured and asks Susie for a kiss.
How about a kiss? For luck.
You've got to be kidding.
This causes Susie to kneel down and nothing happens. Then, we get to Queen's monologue about the night before revealing that she has Noel crucified. Susie fires a rude buster and seemingly incapacitating Queen before we get to the Giga Queen fight. Something important here is that Susie shows off why she's Deltarune's best character, in my opinion, so perfectly. And that Noel gives in and tells her that they should give up. But Susie doesn't give a damn. She gets her friends up to endure the fight. And sure, it doesn't work, and it's silly, but the dichotomy of this shonen-esque desire to never give up, paired with the fact that she's inherently a very silly character, is kind of why I like this character so much. Her grit, her determination, contrast with the silly jokes of a typical Toby Fox game, kind of led me to create this video. Well, other reasons too, but we'll get to those. After a punch-out fight, Queen urges Noel to make another dark fountain or else she'll crush Susie into 8 bits. However, this leads to what the entire story arc has been building up to, Noel telling her robot mom to leave Susie alone. And as stupid as I made that sound, this is satisfying to watch. Noel has been treated by others and herself like a pushover, with her constantly folding to other people's desires and whims. But the thing that gets me is that Queen seems to accept that she was wrong, and urges her to choose the world that makes her happy. And Noel, transitively, seems to feel genuine sympathy for Queen, genuinely wondering if she's dead, and if she was wrong to resist her. Then, something interesting happens. Lost Girl begins to play as we reintroduce the themes of escapism back into the conversation. Noel explains that this world is just better than the real world. Like, sure, Queen is a tyrant, but here, away from the pressures of reality, life can be whatever you want it to be. Susie brings up all the wacky characters they meet. Sure, she didn't get especially close to any Cyber City Darkners, but she's referring to Lancer and Ralsei here. 2 friends that she can unknowingly never see in the light world. And Noel brings up that anything can be healed with a little spell, likely referring to her dad. Ready for a cold take? So cold it'll ice shock ya? Rudy isn't making it to the end credits, I'm sorry to say. Bro has been in the hospital for a week, and every dialogue option is either lamenting him not being around or alluding to how serious his condition is. I'm just saying, it'll hit hard because I love Rudy, but I also 100% think his ass is grass. So it's understandable how desperate Noel is, because she likely understands how hard it is better than anyone. Anyway, Berdly readies his halberd and almost spawns a dark fountain before Ralsei does what he does best and tells people a bit of information right when they need to know it. Basically, if you open dark fountains within dark fountains, you'll summon a titan, and they will destroy the entire world. I want to clear up a misconception that Ralsei isn't necessarily against opening dark fountains. He's perfectly fine when Kris and Susie do it. He's against making titans, which is what Queen's plan would do. So now that that's cleared up, we must acknowledge that Berdly almost started the roaring. Remember that for later. I told you Berdly is the secret to all of the lore. Now this moment is the start of a new arc for Susie, but I'll get to that when we get to that. Anyway, as for the rest of the chapter, Berdly says sorry. Queen makes it very clear that she is in fact not dead, had no idea what's going on, and it's all clear that she cares for Noel. Berdly, Queen, and Noel make up. Susie congratulates Noel, and it seems like she's about to ask her out before defaulting to a joke. Then we get to the big fountain stealing cutscene where Susie wonders out loud if making more fountains is really a bad thing. After all, one could argue that if not for the Dark Worlds and player intervention, these 2 characters would still be enemies. Kris seals the Dark Fountain, and we finally reach the end of Chapter 2. Or so you'd think. You see, this chapter onwards we get many scenes of Susie hanging out with Kris. And who are you kidding? Of course I'm going to analyze them. I'm me. We open back on the library where Noel confirms to Berdly that what they must have experienced must have been a dream. Though in my opinion, I suspect that they know better. How could they have had the same dream? And in Chapter 4, Berdly is back to Susie simping, something that he is vehemently against in Chapter 2. And Noel remarks how similar Susie seems to the dream version of her. Then, there's the weird route, but I'll talk about that later. Noel tries to look for Susie's tail, and this causes her to get angry. Then Noel leaves. Then Susie realizes that they actually saved the world for the first time. You could argue they did this with King as well, but King wasn't trying to cause the roaring, just protect the knight's will. Susie laments how nobody even knows what they just did, but justifies it with it being better that way.
People'd freak out if they knew the world is in danger. Though, it kinda sucks Noel has to forget too. Whatever, let's just get out of here.
I find it interesting here that Susie focuses on Noel here. It doesn't suck because the dark fountains made them closer as friends. It sucks because Noel forgets and Susie likes her. What was that about being selfish again? Then as Kris leaves the library, Susie invites herself to go along with them. This is the start of Kris and Susie's most visible friendship. This segment is awesome because you get to see Susie's reaction to all the weird shit in Hometown. Like, yeah, they became friends in Chapter 1, but Chapter 1 was mainly about establishing Susie as a cool rebel, and don't get me wrong, she is very cool and very rebel, but in Chapter 2 we get to see Susie's world expand. We learn that she's kind of an antisocial goofball. She goes on a not date with Noel, she learns to tolerate Berdly, and her and the fun gang become closer than ever. So ending this chapter with Susie and Kris hanging out is kind of fitting, isn't it? So it's kind of hard to talk about this friendship without mentioning the Simpson in the room. Kris is a freaking weirdo, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, most of the time when we make them interact with shit, their first response is to put their mouth up against it. There's also that, but again, let's pace ourselves. Let's just focus on the raw gremlin energy we've launched on the world. If you check this book, Kris will attempt to eat it and Susie will tell you to share some. You can reverse steal an egg if you've got one. Hell, it's even revealed that Susie drinks Alfie's alleyway milk. That sentence is weird to people who haven't played the game. You two even try to fit in the freezer, but again, this friendship isn't just great because they eat moss together. Probably would take turns eating crayons. It's great because they genuinely care about each other. Before we move on, there's also this minor detail that Susie and Caddy are at odds. It keeps getting brought up. I don't know what to do with this information, really, so I'm just gonna leave it here. Anyway, let's move on to the shelter scene. Snowy and Monster Teen are talking about what could possibly be in there, implying that Kris saw something down there that changed them irreparably. Snowy calls them a weenie. This leads to Susie standing up for Kris and scaring the two jackasses away. Something I haven't seen many people talk about is Susie seemingly reads Kris's expression after asking what's inside, ultimately dropping it because she sees it makes them uncomfortable. The character growth is nice to see, but remember, her current objective within Deltarune is to find out what's in there. And remember, she knows that Kris knows what's in there. Now, I hope this plot point isn't dropped because it could lead to a lot of drama later on. But here's hoping. Time for more Susie and Noel content. We see Noel and Rudy playing Dragon Blazers, and what's interesting here is that in the normal route, Noel laments that she doesn't know any healing magic in real life. I think she knows. Then when she notices Susie, she skedaddles out of there. This scene is really funny for a number of reasons. For one, Rudy is a massive smartass making fun of the situation right as it unfolds before him. Like, for one, he's bedridden and threatens to kick Susie's ass. And second, he jokes about Kris taking them out for a movie. Now, I bring this scene up because it's a nice contrast to the antagonistic relationship Carol and Susie have for one. And two, it sets up one thing. Susie, despite being a bit of a smartass herself, doesn't understand these jokes too well. This leads us to Sans the skeleton. Sans is the master of rage bait. I mean, hell, in Chapter 1, he literally tells Kris that he befriended their mom. And when you add Susie to the mix, just take the janitor scene for one.
Hey, are you the boss around here?
Me? I'm just the janitor.
Then where's the cashier?
Cashier? We don't have one.
Then who do we buy stuff from?
Me.
Then that makes you the cashier.
Nope, I'm the janitor. I'm just filling in.
Are there any other employees?
Nope.
Then why don't you hire someone else?
Whoa, you think I can afford that on a janitor's salary? So I know this video isn't about Sans, but I feel like he's misinterpreted by the fandom at large. I've seen a ton of people say that Sans is a scumbag in Deltarune, and in my opinion, he's not. He's largely the same person he is in Undertale, it's just a lot of his reactions aren't being seen through the guise of some kid, they're being seen through the guise of an edgy teenager. But I've seen a lot of people say that Sans is a scumbag. Again, I don't think he is, but particularly because Papyrus is gone. Now, this is interesting because I also think it isn't true, because there's another character who acts in that exact same role. Susie. Susie acts in the Papyrus role. Of course, here is where we get the famous Egg's husband scene. I know I'll talk about how cringy it is, but like, imagine this from Susie's perspective. Remember, she puts Toriel on a pedestal. She's likely jealous of Kris's seemingly perfect home life, and this is one of the first big cracks she sees in that image. And look at her reaction, she's speechless. And there's a similar scene in chapter 4, again, where Asgore can't take a hint. And in QC's diner, she just states,
Kris, anyone tell you your family's goddamn weird?
and it is weird. Like, imagine you have this awful relationship with your parents, then this creepy nerd who seemingly has it all, a good mom, a nice home, unlimited moss. And then you just see the outline of a messy divorce. You probably wouldn't know what to think, so yeah, it is goddamn weird. Next we go straight to the Dreamer home, where Susie awkwardly tries to go home, but then Toriel opens the door, and Susie again awkwardly tries to leave. Now we can finally analyze the Toriel and Susie connection. I've spent an hour and 30 minutes on this shit. Oh my god. So, as I've previously gotten to speculate, based on past, present, and future information, Susie has a bad home life. And I've gone on to view the parents in this game as a reflection of how Susie views her own. You know, the whole universal parent interpretation. Even after King redeemed himself, Susie is still at his throat. And given the parallels I think King has to Susie, I think this is just how Susie sees her dad. For the reasons I've drilled this into your skull, Queen being the entire basis of this interpretation constantly antagonizes Susie and assumes that she likes skateboards because she likes playing a funny flash game, possibly reflecting a neglectful or tired mother who doesn't really care to understand her. And like this opening scene, Toriel opens the door and Susie is reminded that she doesn't belong there, tries to leave, but at the promise of pie, which thematically in this franchise has represented family in the past, she decides to enter Toriel's house. And look how Susie behaves when she enters Toriel's home. She stands straight up, eyes pointed to the ceiling. This could mean two things. Either one, Susie is on her best behavior, trying to look presentable in front of someone she deeply respects, or the darker interpretation that this is a learned behavior, as in this is something she learned over time to show parents the utmost respect by standing still and agreeing. I'm no child psychologist, I'm a YouTuber who hasn't posted in 2 years, but people have drawn parallels to how this reflects other children of controlling or abusive parents represented in media. And I mean, if that's the case, then this was probably intentional. The point is, she only drops it when she thinks Toriel isn't looking. Either way, this paints a pretty disturbing picture. Whatever your interpretation is, I personally side more with the first one, to be honest. Toriel continues to treat Susie with kindness, even inviting her in to help her make pie. I love this because there's this theme in this game of Susie slowly learning more and more things. In chapter 1, she learned to value mercy. In chapter 2, she learned how to heal people, and now she's learning how to cook. It seems that Toriel is aware of Susie's delinquent behavior and passes it off as a joke. Now, to what extent Toriel is aware of Susie's previous antics is up for debate, but seemingly Alphys was aware that Susie ate the chalk in chapter 1, and deliberately sent Kris with her, because Alphys is a bad teacher. As they start making the pie, Susie seems to calm down a bit. Though this line where Toriel explains what gingerbread men are is kind of concerning to me. Like, not only has Susie been eating shit off the floor, but she doesn't even know what a gingerbread man is. Lots of people have taken Susie's last line, "Gingerbread monsters? Huh, cool," to mean that she used to live in an area that was heavily human populated. We don't know much about human society in these games, but if it is true and Susie has never seen a gingerbread monster, then that's kind of alarming, isn't it? In chapter 4, Susie laments how when she was a kid they told her that she wasn't allowed to play piano, possibly as a form of discrimination. This would give another reason for Susie to hate Kris in the beginning, despite the fact that these two are natural allies in personality. If Kris had a loving family, also had everything Susie doesn't, but was also a human, then yeah, I can see her be a little more than upset about that. Hurt people after all. And as I've already talked about, Susie seems to parallel Kris in terms of being a foil. It's implied that as a kid, Kris resented their human nature and wanted to grow horns like the rest of their family. This could even explain why Susie feels the need to hide her tail. It's a constant reminder that she doesn't fit in. Under this lens and interpretation, Noel finding Susie's tail sort of cute seems a lot more earth-shatteringly sweet. I know this is speculation, but come on, if this is true and leads to a sort of arc of self-acceptance for Susie, it would probably be my favorite part of future chapters. Anyway, Kris is aura farming. Toriel and Susie exchange terrible puns, but due to Toriel being disturbed that her tires are slashed, she begins to halt progression of the pie. Susie tries to awkwardly walk home, only for Toriel to bring up sleeping over as a possibility. Now, in my opinion, I think Toriel is doing this to protect Susie. She just saw her tires get slashed, and now we all know who did it, but Toriel doesn't know that. For all she knows, a lunatic could be out there. This is supported by Toriel suggesting that everyone sleep in the living room. That way, if someone attempted to break in and attack them, they'd all be together. Anyway, this leads to the scene where Susie refuses to call home. Something that kind of started the idea all these parental analysis theories in the first place. Like, yeah, she's a rebellious teenager, they aren't exactly known for liking their parents. But this, amongst everything else, kind of supports my point. Susie just wants Toriel to be her mom. She feels abandoned or rejected, hell, even neglected or worse by her actual parents. And because of that, looks to Toriel as this person who should be protected at all costs. Like her number one motivation in the new chapters, aside from kicking the knight's ass, is saving Undyne and protecting Toriel. Now, I might as well talk about the other popular Susie analysis from this time, that she was homeless, and that she lives in the alleyway. People point to her claiming that she's never had a room before in chapter 2, and her ripped jeans is evidence for this. In my opinion, this has pretty much been debunked, however. Like, in the secret route of chapter 3, she mentions having shampoo, meaning that she showers regularly, something that would be hard for a broke, homeless teenager. And in chapter 4, if you select this building during the place where it rains sequence, you get this dialogue. Let's go to your house. Hell, if you interact with it earlier, she gets uncomfortable. Also, this is just me, but I think if Susie was homeless, she wouldn't bother going to school. Why would Susie willingly go to a place where 98% of the people hate her? Susie has a house, but not a home. Likely a place where she doesn't feel valued or understood. Hell, she doesn't go home for an entire day and her parents didn't even call her, or the police or anything. Of course, this could all be debunked in later chapters. We could learn that Susie is just embarrassed of her family, and that could be a happy ending to these sort of things. But I really don't think the story is going in that direction. Each chapter has been shedding more and more light on these kids' lives, and seeing them be broken in some sort of way makes me wonder, what if Susie never became friends with Kris? What if she never found the Dark Fountain? What if Noel never talked to her? All these things are so minor, and it very clearly could have gone in the opposite direction. If Susie was completely abandoned by everyone, would she act like king? Reject those who abandoned her? Would she be manipulated into the knight's plan in some way, or would she just vanish with no one caring about her? Later chapters show Susie's more caring side, specifically to Ralsei and Kris. There's no doubt in my mind that she loves them, not really as friends, but a second family. Ralsei even says that Castletown should be a second home to her. And yeah, sometimes Susie is a dick, But families don't always get along. They fight, they disagree. Sometimes we say things we shouldn't have. So there's this thing I'm sure you've never heard of. It's called tea theory. Basically, in Chapter 2, there's this one Addison who can sell you tea flavored after party members. It's widely accepted now that the tea heals based on how much the party members like each other. Like there's this gag where Noel drinks Susie tea and heals 400 HP. Notice how all party members heal Susie 120 HP, even Noel, someone she just met. I wonder why that is. The important thing to note is that after one day of knowing them, she is incredibly protective of them and loves them. Susie takes acts of kindness incredibly seriously, so maybe the act of just being friends with her led her to be this protective over them. This is of course with the caveat that both Kris and Ralsei are keeping secrets from Susie. Secrets that'll shake up everything she knew. So after watching TV, Susie drifts off to sleep, and Kris opens a dark fountain. So we finally did it. We covered all of chapters 1 and 2 as it pertains to Susie and a few other characters. And my analysis of her character, as well as dipping into some future chapter content. So it might seem confusing to you guys why I spend so long talking about these things, not directly Susie related, like Noel's arc or about standing up for herself or Berdly's Berdliness. Well, for one, if it wasn't for Susie, it's a real possibility that Noel would have never stood up to Queen. As in the weird route, instead of letting Susie tell her to be a stronger person, you, and I mean you, not Kris, the game makes it very clear that you exploit the fact that she's a pushover and manipulate her into getting stronger. It's also telling that in the weird route, almost all of Susie and Noel's scenes are skipped, to the point where even she's concerned about it. Noel's character development is linked to Susie in general. As for why I talked about Berdly, here's the thing. Berdly is a foil for Susie. His arc is shockingly similar to Susie's. And yeah, I get it, Toby Fox is a formula he likes using. But given that it's Susie who generates his arc to change in the first place, this tells me that this was somewhat intentional. That having Susie be the one to recruit someone who is a lot like her was the point, considering that there's 2 other times where that happens in the game. Berdly is also important to a point I want to make much, much later. So much later. As for the world around Susie, this is the first time we've experienced it with her. It's the first time a lot of previous actions and dialogue get recontextualized into a more depressing image. And like, I'm going to keep doing it. Chapter 4 has 3 separate scenes where you can interact with Susie. Hell, even Chapter 3, which seems barren in terms of Susie content, well, not actually, because her world gets flipped upside down in that chapter. I'll level with you. A ton of characterization for Susie gets introduced later. Some of it I've already talked about now, but this is to paint a clear picture for this character. Despite that, Susie was still my favorite character back then too, back before all these insane reveals. Personally, I assumed that Chapter 7's ending would be a final confrontation between Kris and Susie, and it still might be, but I'm not convinced of that anymore. I will say though, given that we all experienced terminal brain rot, those years were some of the most fun I've ever had being a fan of anything. Yeah, some of it sucked, and again, I think a lot of people now even misinterpret Noel's character. But overall, I think the community kept generating content for itself. And then, more content actually dropped. No, I'm not talking about chapters 3 and 4, I'm talking about the Spamton sweepstakes. Half charity, half ARG. Based around everyone's favorite salesman from 1997. Most of the information here isn't relevant, as it'll get covered in future chapter analysis, thus also why we're not talking about Spamton's silence, considering literally all of that information is just in chapters 3 and 4. I'm only going to cover the stuff that mentions Susie, which is almost nothing. Okay, it's still relevant, I swear. So, welcome to a brief summary of the relevant Spamton sweepstakes content. Again, the vast majority of content here is either irrelevant because it gets covered later, like Kris going off to play Noel's piano, or scraps of information around Des. Who is Des? It doesn't matter. Or minuscule lore around these characters when they were kids. And again, Susie is relatively new in town. Most of Noel's blog and future chapter content related to foreshadowing isn't about her. And yet, there is one post presumably talking about the first time Susie bullied Kris. Well, the first documented time anyway. If you think I wasn't going to hyper-analyze it, then you have no idea whose channel you're watching. So, the actual post titled New Girl. This is, in my opinion, one of the biggest things that contributes to the fandom mischaracterizing Noel as an obsessive stalker, at least when this came out. And that's because this post is written from her perspective. So the post in question is only shown to friends, probably Kris, who didn't read it given that they haven't read any of Noel's other posts, and Berdly, who probably did read it given that Berdly thinks that Susie is a bad person. As for the post itself, it goes a little something like this.
Okay, change of plans. Originally I was going to read it out in full. Then I realized that I couldn't make any visuals for it. So, I'm just going to summarize it, then we're going to talk about it. Sound cool? Cool. Let's do that. Noel writes about Susie bullying Kris after class, specifically threatening to kill them by comparing their head to an apple and then biting it in half. Kris doesn't respond, so she throws the apple at them, but Kris blocks it and then takes a bite out of it too. This enrages Susie, and she tells them that their mom is going to leave them eventually. Kris then whispers something in her ear. Noel can't make it out, but whatever it was causes Susie to leave. Then Kris finds Noel hiding in a locker, and then they also leave. So, I have some thoughts. For one, my interpretation that Susie just wants Toriel to be her mom is basically confirmed here. The targeted attacks about a mom not wanting a child could also reflect the idea that Susie has a neglectful mom. It does read like projection. And here is the canonical start of the whole shampoo thing. Oh boy. But before we address the never-ending can of worms that is Christmas dreamer Deltarune II, let's talk about our narrator, Noel. So, like I said, after this came out, some people decided to interpret Noel as a stalker. And upon replaying Chapter 1 and rewatching the footage, I have come to the conclusion that Noel is a complex character, and much like every other character in Deltarune, the community only focuses on her negative traits. Because we all learned nothing from debating Kara's morality. So I'm just gonna say it. This ARG that most casual fans missed has Noel's worst scene, and it is this one. However, we need a bit of context. Sure, Noel simping for Susie here when she's literally bullying one of her friends isn't great. The post goes out of its way to show that she considers this dangerous bullying. However, for whatever reason, Noel stops from acting responsible and lets Susie bully one of her friends. Noel does mention wanting to trade seats with Kris, and it is possible that she took other actions. So it's not like Noel didn't try. It's also important to mention that by the time Chapter 1 rolls around, her opinion on Susie has kind of flipped on its head. Now, we don't know why she acts like this, but maybe it's because she noticed that Susie never actually hurt Kris. Maybe she noticed something else about Susie, maybe one of her positive traits. But an important thing to mention here is that Susie in this post never actually hurt Kris, which is kind of important. Second, her being a deer in headlights who refuses to act is her arc, the thing that she overcomes in the game. And her having more negative traits like this gets more explored in the weird route pretty explicitly. So to make a very long story short, Noel is a complex character with a lot of strengths and weaknesses,
And just because this post shows off her weaknesses does not mean she's a bad person. Okay, time to address Christmas Dreamer. So, I've been trying my hardest to avoid talking about Kris, and that's because a lot of their characterization in chapters 1 and 2 was incredibly vague. We knew shockingly little about the character we play here. We knew that they enjoyed piano, they have a reputation for being antisocial, and they hate us. This caused people to interpret them like they did Frisk or Kara, deliberately interpret them as entirely good and misunderstood or evil. As a former Kris Knight theorist, I never really thought Kris was evil. At the time, I assumed they were opening fountains to further indulge in escapism, to have fun adventures away from their shitty life. And boy was I wrong. I mean, they are escaping their shitty life to an even shittier life, so there's that. This post kind of shatters that image. For one, the obvious here, Kris has a knack for aura farming. This implies to me that the reason why Kris was shocked that Susie would assume they tried to get her expelled is because Susie was never much of a threat to them in the first place. I mean, yeah, she does shove them into lockers, but as Noel explains, Kris never reported Susie's actions, or never even seemed that bothered by them. And when Noel assumed that Kris was laughing because Susie made a joke, it could have 3 interpretations. Either Kris was genuinely laughing like Susie had said something funny, which again is another parallel they would have with Susie. Kris wouldn't see Susie as a threat, but a kind of pushover. I mean, let's analyze this seriously. Susie threatens to bite Kris's head off over shampoo. That's kinda dumb, right? We know Kris has a really traumatic past, so maybe by comparison, this minor thing could be seen as really stupid. Funny, even. Kris took a bite out of the apple in a sort of, yeah, right, Susie, of course you're going to do it way. Laughing the whole thing off, showing that they aren't scared of her. They could have said a simple, okay, to piss Susie off, knowing that she couldn't get under Kris's skin. Second interpretation here is that Kris was aura farming, chuckling menacingly like an enemy stand user. This would match Kris catching the apple and taking a bite out of it here as a sort of challenge to a rival, sort of goading. Go on, do it then, motion. This could explain what Kris said to Susie as a taunt. Susie said that Toriel would realize the world is so much better without them, so under this interpretation, Kris could have simply said, forget about me, like yours did, or something similar. I can see why that would kind of piss Susie off, to the point of leaving, and it does have some precedent, given that it's deliberately implied that Kris deliberately eggs on Berdly to piss him off. This interpretation would also recontextualize pre-Chapter 1 relationship as closer to a rivalry than the stereotypical bully-victim dynamic than we previously thought. Perhaps the reason why Kris likes Susie so much is due to the fact that they think she's fun to piss off. There are a ton of scenes in Chapter 4 where Kris tries not to laugh at Susie's seeming failures, implying that this rivalry was definitely there. As previously mentioned, Susie is quite susceptible to rage bait, so what if Kris's tricked her personality along with mommy issues is what pissed Susie off? I'm a fan of this second interpretation a lot. It characterizes the entire thing as mutual more than straight out mean-spirited. And for the final interpretation, Kris is depressed. Now, before we continue, I think it's important to note that I am not a therapist, I am a YouTuber. However, I do think Kris has some form of mental anguish. We know they feel like an outsider in hometown because they aren't a monster. Being antisocial is common when you feel, like an outsider. And we know Kris is. So is having an irregular sleep schedule. Kris ripping out the soul seems to have a direct correlation with self-harm, and as it seems incredibly painful to do so. And as this goes for every other Kris interpretation, Kris is clearly not okay. This interpretation uses Kris's depression as the sole motivation for their actions here, and it's a common theory and one I subscribe to, that Carol is manipulating Kris by guilt-tripping them with what happened to Des. You promised. Something that Kris either had something to do with or feels immense guilt for. they go along with her plan to find her. This leaves them feeling aimless, constantly focusing on their guilt, and even in school they are unable to escape from this. Then comes Susie, someone who is actively hostile to them for reasons they likely don't understand. The thing that tips me off to this is that Kris laughs. Now, laughs are frequently used in these games either as an expression of amusement, an intimidation tactic, or what's important here, pain. Now, obviously, I don't think Kris is Frisk or Kara. I think they're their own character. However, they intentionally share a lot of similarities with these two. For one, Kara is frequently depicted as laughing even when it isn't appropriate to do so. Now, any Undertale fan who's ever gone to the discourse of Kara is more complex than an evil murder child knows what I'm about to say. You can watch some videotapes that go like this.
What? Oh yeah, I remember. We tried to make butterscotch pie. For Dad, right? The recipe asked for cups of butter, but we accidentally put buttercups instead. Yeah, those flowers got him sick. I felt so bad we made Mom so upset. I should have laughed it off like you did. And when checking the snowy amalgamate, you get the option to laugh. You laugh. You keep laughing. It's so funny, you can't stop. Tears run down your face. What? You didn't do that? I'm going to base this interpretation on the idea that the narrator in Undertale is Kara. A theory that's kind of dubious, as several people have pointed out. But if they are, that implies that Kara's coping mechanism is laughter. When in pain and when scared, the amalgamate implies that laughing is being used like this. And elsewhere, Undyne shrugs off her death with a chuckle. And Flowey nervously laughs at the end of the No Mercy run. All that to say that if the Undertale narrator isn't Kara, it's so frequently used. Meaning that Kris's laughing here might not be a menacing chuckle or even a genuine expression of amusement. It might be an expression of pain. Sure, biting the apple could be an acceptance of the challenge or just an acknowledgement that they aren't afraid of Susie, or it could mean something more. Literally, Susie threatened to kill Kris. I mean, she does it again and again. Biting the apple here might just be an acceptance of that. Do it. As for what Kris said to Susie, it could have been as simple as a statement of agreement. I know. As we know from the previous 2 fucking hours of this video, Susie, while violent, rude, crass, and, yes, an asshole, isn't evil. So to imagine seeing this weird kid who smells like apples and has, in your opinion, the perfect life, just solemnly tells you to get it over with, that would kind of mess you up, right? So do I personally believe Interpretation 3? Well, not really. It's a tad edgy for my tastes. I believe it's a mixture of all 3 of these things, but personally I think 2 is the most fun. Kris is complicated, and a lot of their actual character is up to interpretation. We'll probably never know what exactly happened, as I don't see either party bringing this up ever again. However, it does give us important context for these two. When Susie wonders if they'll still be friends if there wasn't Castletown, yeah, now I can see why she'd feel that way. Susie is incredibly complex. We just analyzed a scene where she is incredibly unlikable, yet it doesn't feel out of character. Recognize that the writing is so good that my favorite character threatening to kill another doesn't make me hate her, or upset with the writing because of how incredible the work that's been done to make it feel real. I haven't really talked about why Susie is my favorite character, have I? I've just talked about how complex she is. Well, the thing is, the reason why I like Susie so much is because she feels real. Sure, she's a cartoon Barney the Dinosaur look-alike, but somehow she's the most relatable character I've ever seen.
This is going to get a little cringe for a second, but as a teenager, I went through a lot of the same things that Susie did. I look back at the person I was as a teenager and see a delinquent, a bully, someone who was angry with the world and made that everyone else's problem. But I wasn't always like that. Sometimes I'd make dumb jokes, eat stuff I probably shouldn't. Hell, I started this channel as a teenager, and my first uploads were just similarly dumb and stupid. Maybe I'm projecting. Perhaps this is incredibly cringe and is killing my credibility as I speak. But when I say Susie feels real, it's because there are a lot of people out there that feel like her. And the fact that she grows beyond those negative traits and becomes a hero, all while being herself, is incredibly powerful. Susie isn't just Deltarune's best character because she's the funniest or because she's the most complex. To me, she's the best because she feels real. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for part 1. As mentioned, next time is going to cover chapters 3 and 4, so stay tuned for that mess. I had a lot of fun and got frustrated several times working on this project, but to be honest, I'm just glad it's done. It feels like I just pushed a boulder up to the top of a mountain or something. But I'd say the best part about working on this was reconnecting with all of you. Whether it be streaming or just interacting with you guys in comment sections, you guys sticking around with my channel after I haven't uploaded in so long is really touching, so thank you. Also, thanks to everyone who let me use their footage for this video. I really should have made a list of things to get while I was streaming the game. Sorry. So, yeah. Thank you everyone, and bye.